Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Lowenberg, producing director of LA Theater Works. And today we're going to talk about Bump with two very special guests.
Hi, I'm Chiara Atik, and I wrote the play.
Hi, I'm Dr. Judith Reichman. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I've been a contributor to the Today Show and an author of several books.
Chiara, let's start with you. And speaking of Bump, congratulations on your new edition. Is this your first child?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Exciting. Yeah. So how's it going? How's motherhood going for you?
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's a weird time to have a baby during a pandemic, but also kind of a good time because you don't feel like you're missing out on what all of your friends are doing without babies. So yeah, it's been really great. I had a great experience.
So what inspired you to write Bump?
What inspired me is there was a 2012 New York Times article about the Odon device and Jorge Odon, and I loved the sort of his eureka moment with the cork and the bottle and putting that together with a field that he knew very little about and had no personal experience with. And it was around the time where I and my friends were getting married and starting to think about families and having children of our own. And I was interested in sort of his outsider perspective. And also around the same time I started being more interested in stories of, pregnancy from friends who had gone through it and exploring what it was like, because it's nothing I really thought about too much growing up. And so for me, the play just sort of took shape from there. For me, it's an exploration kind of pregnancy, yes, but also knowledge of pregnancy and what it means to know everything, what it means to research, what it means to kind of try to understand from an outside perspective, something that I think is very mysterious until you've gone through it. And when I wrote the play, I hadn't gone through it, obviously.
Yeah. So in the play, the Greek chorus on the birthing message board is a wonderful touch. It's a great inspiration. I'm sure you spent a lot of time online doing research. What did you learn from all the voices that you encountered in the chat room?
I think part of the reason that these chat rooms are so interesting and also popular is there are so many disparate experiences surrounding this sort of one universal experience of bringing a human life into the world and pregnancy. And there's this need for people to, when you're having this crazy thing happen to your body, you want to reach out and talk to anybody who's maybe also experiencing it or has experienced it or can provide some sort of reassurance. And what's wonderful about the internet age is that if you're in a situation where no one in your life is going through that or able to provide solace or advice or comfort, you can reach out into the void and find companionship and find people who are exactly 21 weeks and 4 days pregnant like you are, and you can compare things and you can say, is this normal? Or you can vent, or you can say, I'm scared about what's going to happen. I think that provides an amazing amount of not just information, but just comfort just in the shared experience of it.
Judith, as an expert in women's health, what did you think of Bump?
Well, I very much enjoyed listening to it. I thought that the Greek chorus that you talk about was really interesting, and the way women compared their experiences. As an obstetrician, I was always concerned when anybody came in with anecdotal stories, which is kind of what the chat rooms were, and took those anecdotal stories and made them into, oh my God, this is what's going to happen to me. But if we look back in history, we always got these horrible stories from our mothers and our aunts and our grandmothers of all the terrible things that could happen while we're pregnant. So this was kind of nice to hear the wonderful things and compare the wonderful stories. I was a little concerned about the health advice that was being given in these chat rooms and some of the decision-making that was colored by people who really didn't have the expertise to give advice.
Can you give us an example of something that disturbed you?
Well, one of the stories that disturbed me was the fact that the protagonist said she had a friend who went into the hospital and they gave her oxytocin and she had a prolonged labor and the baby had meconium. And it sounded like she was basically equating the need to go into a hospital, having labor continued to be induced for reasons that we don't know because we did not know the entire medical history. And the fact that this baby had meconium, which by the way is a symptom of fetal distress, but she made it sound like this was all the fault of being in the hospital versus what could have been an episode during the pregnancy or labor that required the type of care that this patient had.
Judith, how do you counsel patients who prefer a non-traditional approach like the water birth in the play?
Well, the truth is that I traditionally had a somewhat different attitude towards all this. I had a saying, and I know this is going to be disturbing to listeners, but I used to say that home deliveries are for pizzas. Okay? However, I became with time appreciative of the way women wanted to have some say in their birthing experience. I never used a water bath. I've looked at the data. We certainly didn't have it in the hospitals that I worked in. There doesn't seem to be a negative, except that in the rare instance where a baby can aspirate water, but that's very rare. Being in water does take away some of the pressure that women have. And as we all know, as soon as we get into a warm bath, we feel better. So I think it probably does have some positive impact on the sense of distress during labor. And whether the babies that come out from water births are going to go to Harvard or not, I cannot tell you.
You never know, right? Well, one of your best-selling books is Relax, This Won't Hurt, Painless Answers to Women's Most Pressing Health Questions. What are the unique challenges of dealing with expectant mothers?
I think giving them information, but also letting them understand that during the process of both pregnancy, labor, delivery, we can't schedule things. We don't know what's going to happen. And when the woman makes this extremely intricate birth schedule, and this is what's going to happen, and this is what she's going to do, and no, she won't have an epidural, and no, the doula will be there, and the midwife will do such and such. These plans are lovely on paper. They are not what occur during the process. You have to be prepared for things that can occur and emergencies that occur. And if you think about it, the times of your life that you are most stressed is when you're born and obviously when you die. So birth is an extraordinarily important time of the baby's life. It's also an important time of the mother's life. In the past, we had huge numbers of women who died, and maternal mortality, especially in the developing world, is still horrific. And we lose millions and millions of babies during the birth process in the world. Fewer in the US, but more in the developing world. Anything that we can do to diminish that is of great importance, but writing down a schedule of what's going to happen is not going to be the paramount way to conduct a delivery.
You retired about 3 years ago, and you started your career in Israel, and then you moved to Los Angeles And you said to me once that you treated two very different kinds of women in Israel and on the west side of LA. Can you talk a little bit about that and those challenges?
Well, it's interesting. When I was in charge of the delivery rooms in a fairly large hospital in Israel, we did not give everyone epidurals. We basically allowed the women to labor on, and many of these women were having second, third, fourth pregnancies. There were no such things as women coming in with all these plans of what they were going to do. At the beginning of the time that I was delivering babies, husbands were not in the delivery room. This was something that a woman did, and she did on her own. Somewhat like the story in the book that occurred with the woman who was by herself in a cabin with very few amenities. I mean, we did have amenities. We were able to monitor the babies, and if necessary, we did vacuum extraction or forceps or C-section if there was distress. When I came to LA and I worked in a very affluent area, there was more of a sense that the patient would write what she wants to have done. But I found that ultimately those who had the most detailed plans ended up with C-sections. It was invariable. So, including I delivered several doulas, and because of fetal distress, we had to do C-sections. But we did have a much higher rate of epidurals. I used to joke that some of the patients wanted to have their hair done, their epidural, and then come to the hospital.
Chiara, tell us about the flashbacks to the colonial mom and the midwife in the play. Those scenes really made me glad that I live in the 21st century.
Yeah, those scenes, again, and just thinking about the play and imagining pregnancies in different situations, and pregnancy, what it would be like to experience a pregnancy and a birth with varying degrees of knowledge. You know, we have in our current world every possible piece of information at our fingertips, whether it's anecdotal, whether it's real, whether it's false, whether it's, you know, helpful or not. A pregnant woman can look everything up, every twinge, every symptom, anything she wants to know. So I just, I thought of it would be interesting to show the story, a parallel story of someone who really knows nothing about what she's about to undergo or what she's experiencing or what it's going to be like, someone who's isolated and whose only source of information comes from another woman, in this case a midwife, who is there to sort of help her through the process.
I'd like to touch a little bit, Chiara, on your career. When did you decide to become a playwright?
I decided to be a playwright. I guess I was still in high school, later years of high school, and I applied to NYU as a playwright. I wrote a play, I sent it in, I got it, and then I've been a playwright ever since. So when I was 18, a long time. And
when did you were in residence at the Ensemble Studio Theater, which produced the play. Mm-hmm. How long have you been there?
They have a group for writers under 30, and when I was under 30, which I am no longer, I was part of their group. So I think I joined the group when I was 25, and then when I graduated from the group, I became a member there.
Judith, from your work on the Today Show to your best-selling books, you are a trusted voice in women's healthcare. How has your approach to dealing with expectant moms developed over the years?
I think I tried to be more patient with their questions. I understand that they're getting a lot of information, some of it misinformation. So you have to spend a little more time explaining why this story or this anecdote is not applicable, not appropriate, whereas this information may be. I try to gear patients to websites that are basically from well-known institutions and not from people who really have their own agenda to push. I understand the need for family involvement, husband involvement. I don't think that everyone should be there, including the dog. I think that this is a very special procedure. It's medical. We try to make it as friendly and inclusive as possible, but I am concerned to some extent with all the misinformation that's out there and the time that I have to spend to make this information viable versus non-appropriate.
What are the most important recent developments that you've seen in women's reproductive health?
Well, if we talk about prenatal care, that's paramount. And the minute we can improve prenatal care, we're going to improve the rates of premature delivery, which is one of the major causes of neonatal death. This is not only true in the United States, but obviously it's a global issue. The ability of us to manage the pregnancy and to ensure that there are no high-risk situations. And frankly, if you are going to have a home birth, it has to be for someone who has no risks whatsoever. In the US currently, if we look at home births with midwives versus hospital births with midwives, I'm not even talking about physicians, there is a 3 to 4 times increased risk of neonatal death and complications with the home birth. So what you have to make sure is that there are no risk factors. And they've done that in England and Germany and Australia and Holland, and they've had very good success rates as long as they ensure that those women who want a home birth with certified midwives are not at any risk. And a risk might be prematurity, hypertension, previous disorders, previous C-section, previous difficult births. And in first births, where you don't know what's going to happen, you have to make sure that the infant and the baby is not too large, that the woman's pelvis is appropriate, that the pregnancy has developed well. Even so, we now know that in the US, 50% of women who undergo or decide to have home births end up being transferred to hospital situations.
This year of COVID-19 must have affected your life and your career substantially. Chiara, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the theater world, not audio theater, but most of the theater world completely shut down. I had 2 productions shut down. It's been difficult to see your industry and your colleagues go through such a hard time, be out of work, be doing furloughs. Everything is very up in the air. I think with that, writers are sort of in the best position because you can still do your craft without all that. You can continue to write, you can continue to work in that sense. So I'm in an enviable position in terms of that, but hopefully things will be back soon. I hope, people are more hopeful now than they were a few months ago, certainly at a return to theater in the fall.
So what's your next play?
I hope that the play that was supposed to be performed last March in Los Angeles is going to be able to come back. It's called Poor Clare, and it's the story of Saint Clare of Assisi and Saint Francis of Assisi, but sort of a little bit contemporized and hopefully funny and interesting.
So Judith, how about you? How has COVID-19 and this past year changed something in your life?
Well, like everybody else, I'm isolated at home. My 2 daughters live in Tel Aviv. I have not been able to see them in 16 months. I stay up to date on what's happening with the vaccine. I know that many of my colleagues who were in obstetrics and gynecology had to change the way they practice. Obviously, obstetrics continues, but making office visits is very difficult.
Are you planning another book?
I don't know. I wrote 4 of them, and writing the book was a lot of fun. Promoting it and running around the country and doing the book tour was not.
Well, on that note, so thank you both very, very much for participating in this very interesting conversation. Thank you so much.